Mic check 1 2 1 2. It's the Y2K Collector, and my nostalgia for the sixth generation of gaming is just growing and growing more and more and more. And in large part, that's because of the diversity that we saw during that era. The Gen 6 era was the last era of the big four in gaming. Now, I think a lot of us at this stage of the game here in 2025, we're kind of used to the big three in gaming. The big three being Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, right? For the last, I would say maybe 10 years or so, if not more, or maybe a little less, we've gotten used to only seeing new consoles and new games for either the Nintendo Switch or maybe the Wii U if you want to go a little bit further back. You've got the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3. And then obviously you have the Xbox One, and then you have obviously the Xbox Series. But in the sixth generation, you still had a big four because that was when Sega was still in the mix creating consoles. Now, some people might not consider the Sega Dreamcast to be a part of the sixth generation. I personally do. I would not include the Dreamcast in the fifth generation of consoles for a number of reasons. One, just from the time that it was released, the Dreamcast came out, I believe, in 1999. And then I think not long after was when we saw the PlayStation 2 drop, and then we saw like the GameCube and the Xbox come around. So it was in like a 3 to 4 year span. It feels like to me. I don't have the exact dates. You gaming historians can let me know down in the comments below. But just having lived in that era, the Dreamcast felt more to me like a part of the sixth generation than it did the fifth generation. I would consider the fifth generation of gaming consoles to be like the original PlayStation. I would say the Nintendo 64. I would say the Sega Saturn, perhaps. And then I don't think we had gotten any consoles from Microsoft at that point yet. We still didn't have anything from them. So it's kind of, that was when we were still in somewhat of a big three era, with Sega being the third person. And, you know, coming out of the fourth generation, there were a lot of people making consoles. You had obviously Nintendo with the Super Nintendo, you had Sega with the Sega Genesis, you had other consoles like the Neo Geo, the TurboGrafx, PC Engine. So, you know, fourth generation was a very big generation in terms of a lot of different players in the game, a lot of people, different people coming out with consoles and trying to be innovative and creative. But once the technology took that 3D leap in the sixth generation, or really in the fifth generation was when we leaped to 3D. But once things started to go 3D, that was when you saw a lot of people kind of drop out of the game. And Sega tried to hang in there for as long as they could. And I don't blame Sega's ability to create great gaming products. I think they were able to create great systems and games, but a lot of it just fell on poor leadership. It fell on poor management. The leaders and the executives at Sega just couldn't get their game plan straight. They couldn't get their strategy right. And because of that, they ultimately found themselves on the outside of the console game. No pun intended. But when I look at the sixth generation, this was the last generation of genuine diversity. I mean, there were games coming out for the PlayStation 2 that you couldn't get on the GameCube, GameCube games that you couldn't get on Xbox, Xbox games that you couldn't get on Dreamcast, and vice versa. And the beautiful part about it is that each console had their own standout banger titles. You know what I mean? Xbox changed the game with Halo. I mean, people were getting Xbox just for Halo. You know, that was an amazing time. With the GameCube, it was the next generation of Mario games with Sunshine, with Mario Kart Double Dash, with the Star Fox Adventure game, the first time we saw Star Fox in an open world 3D game. And then don't get me started on the PlayStation 2. There are just way too many games to even start talking about with the PlayStation 2. And the Dreamcast, again, held its own, man. You think about games like Grandia, obviously, right, is a big one that comes to my mind when I think about the Sega Dreamcast. And yeah, there were some games that were on the Dreamcast that were also on the PlayStation 1. If you consider games like if you consider games like Marvel vs. Capcom, the first Marvel vs. Capcom did get a release on the original PlayStation, but we all know the superior version was on the Dreamcast. And then we got Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which again, despite that being released on the PlayStation 2 and on the Xbox, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, to me, the superior way to play that game was on the Dreamcast. But Dreamcast had its own great standout titles like the Shenmue games, Spawn, Armageddon, Mars Matrix, Giga Wing. There are so many other games that came out for Dreamcast, and they had their own unique cutesy titles too, like Super Magnetic Neo. A lot of people don't even think about that type of game. That was an amazing kind of like platforming game for the Dreamcast. It had its own standout titles as well. And I think just the diversity that we saw in Generation 6 the nostalgia is starting to grow on me. To be quite honest with you, for the last 4 or 5 years, I felt like I was the most nostalgic for fourth gen games, and I still am. I really do love the fourth generation because that takes me back to the early and mid 90s. That's what I think about when I think about fourth gen. I think about Streets of Rage. I think about Final Fight. I think about Super R-Type. I think about Rocket Knight Adventures. And that generation holds another type of nostalgia for me. It's more of a childlike nostalgia. It takes me back to my mom, smelling my mom's cooking on a Saturday evening or on a Sunday afternoon. It takes me back to memories and times with my brother. But this generation, the GameCube generation, the Xbox generation, this was high school. This was when I was a little bit more mature, older. This is when I had a little bit of pocket change to buy a couple games here and there on my own and just decide what type of games that I liked. This was the time where I was entering Marvel vs. Capcom 2 tournaments at my school and actually winning. That was back when I used to use a little cheat code with Gambit. Shh, don't tell nobody about that. To be quite honest with you, I don't have a ton of nostalgia for Xbox personally, but my cousins played a lot of it, and I had a lot of friends who played Halo religiously. First-person shooters were huge coming out of the fifth generation because that was the age of GoldenEye. N64 brought about GoldenEye, and everyone wanted to play GoldenEye, and Halo kind of took place of GoldenEye in terms of just first-person shooters that everybody just wanted to get together and play. And it was one of the games that was played a lot during my after-school program. But once we got to like Smash Bros, Melee, and Power Stone, it was over. It was a steady rotation of GameCube and Dreamcast, GameCube to Dreamcast, especially when you add in games like the NBA 2K series, the NFL 2K series. We didn't really do a lot of PlayStation 2 gaming in like group settings. We did a lot more like Dreamcast and GameCube. Obviously, because of the whole 4-controller thing, more people got to play. And we weren't really going to buy the multi-tap for the PS2. Not back at that time. We weren't really thinking about that. But all in all, this generation just, the diversity, man, so much diversity. If you were getting together with a group of friends, you weren't bringing one of these consoles. You were probably bringing all of these consoles. One person was bringing the GameCube, another person was bringing the Dreamcast, someone else was bringing the Xbox, and you were just going to take turns rotating the consoles because each had their own amazing standout titles that everyone wanted to play. And I think that's a big part of the reason why I'm just getting so much more nostalgic for Gen 6. But let me know what you think about this. What do you think about the 6th generation? Do you think this was the last era of the big four? I'm interested to know your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.